Welcome, everyone. My name is René Roy. I am the industry co-chair of the National Farm Animal Health and Welfare Council, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our second portion of the National Farm Animal Health and Welfare Council Forum. Today, we will have a forum that is an open dialogue with all of you. We want to have your perspective on some of the work achieved under the plant and animal health strategy. For this task, we have asked Stephen Rush from the ACER group to facilitate the session of today. Our goal today is to discuss about our past and present perspective to better build the future. You are aware of the work the Council is doing to move toward the Animal Health Canada organization that will foster partnership between the public and the private sector. We rely on your input to prepare our path forward for this new initiative. I will now pass the microphone to Hélène Trépanier, our government co-chair at the Council. Hélène.
Merci René. Donc, bonjour à toutes et tous pour cette deuxième journée du Forum annuel du Conseil national sur la santé et le bien-être des animaux d'élevage. Notre première session nous avait informé sur 3 initiatives mondiales en matière de partenariat public-privé, d'évaluation des coûts globaux des maladies animales et aussi d'intégration de l'approche une santé dans les actions et les structures organisationnelles. Aujourd'hui, et ça grâce à vous toutes et tous, notre focus va vraiment porter sur les actions canadiennes des dernières années, mais avec l'objectif de mieux orienter nos actions à venir, les actions que nous espérons mener tous ensemble. Donc, je vous remercie vraiment à l'avance pour votre contribution aux ateliers. Et puis, j'invite maintenant M. Stephen Roche du groupe ACER à venir nous présenter le menu de la journée.
Merci, Hélène. Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Roach. And as was introduced, my job here today is going to be to help facilitate with some, with the help with a large number of individuals from council and from many of our stakeholder representatives to facilitate some discussion with the group here around the plant and animal health strategy, Animal Health Canada, and really this past, present, and future perspectives on animal health and welfare across the country. And so over the next 3 hours, we are going to both present some of the background information and context for this conversation. And then as we had, of course, hoped we could have done something like this in person, take a bit more of a creative virtual approach and have some small group facilitated discussions with you. From a bird's eye view, our agenda for today, which has been circulated by email previously, is outside of some introductions, is to have Melanie start us off from the council with a perspective on where are we at with Animal Health Canada? What does this look like? What's the structure and what's planned moving forward? From there, I will pick things up and talk a little bit about a project that my firm is working on with council, looking at an animal health progress report on the activities and the outcomes as they relate to the plant and animal health strategy in Canada. And from there, we will, as I mentioned, jump into 2 facilitated breakout sessions. The first one will be with small groups of your peers, talking with a facilitator about your organizational past and present perspectives on animal health and welfare. And then as we finish that conversation, we will jump into more of a forward-thinking perspective. So where are we going and how might Animal Health Canada fit into this conversation or these activities? And from there, as we approach 2 p.m. Eastern time, we will wrap up and adjourn for our session. A couple of quick housekeeping comments for you. First and foremost, we appreciate that our partners attend and would like to participate in our session in both English and French. We do have an interpretation option available. So if you scroll down with your cursor to the middle of your screen, you should see a toolbar or taskbar appear. If you scroll to the interpretation icon, which looks like sort of like a globe, as you can see here on my screen, you will have an option to have off, which would default to English, as all of the presentations here will be by default English. And you can select a French option, and that will put you solely in possession of our 2 very capable French interpreters who will provide all commentary in French. Outside of that, If you have any other technical issues, we appreciate everyone doing their best. Again, almost 2 years now with the life under COVID, that we need to be a bit flexible, and internet challenges do arise. And so if you do have any technical issues, both Samantha Benatar and Julia Saracini on our group, on our call today, can support and help facilitate any technical issues you might have. So I'll encourage you to use the chat function in the toolbar, and then you can privately message either Julia or Samantha, who may be able to help troubleshoot a little bit more. One other comment that I would like to make is, as we move forward into the latter half of our presentations today, we are going to do our best to provide facilitated sessions in either language our participants may prefer. So I'm going to ask that if you are an audience member right now that would like to participate in a French-speaking breakout room, that you please scroll to the bottom of your screen, and where you see the reactions icon, if you can please click that and raise your hand, and leave that icon or that hand raised until Julia from our team sends you a direct message. She will ensure that we have you populated in a breakout room that can facilitate that. Again, we're going to do our best to make sure we can accommodate those preferences as we move forward, again, in this virtual environment. The last comment I'll make is that, again, we appreciate all of you taking the time to join us today, and are very excited to share some of our thoughts with you, but more importantly, to engage with you. It's something that I very much have taken from forum sessions in the past and meetings in the past when we've been able to get together in person, and we really wanted to try and accommodate that and provide an opportunity to have some dialogue with your peers. And so that's very much what our goal is today. With that, I'm going to hand things off to Melanie to kick us off with a little bit of a discussion and an update on Animal Health Canada. So Melanie, I will hand over to you.
Great, thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. One moment, 1 second here. Okay. Can you see my screen okay, Steve? Just give me a thumbs up if it's okay. Okay, excellent. So thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm really impressed to see what wonderful turnout we have for today's event. And I know I'm really looking forward to, as Renee and Helen and also Stephen have mentioned, I'm really looking forward to hearing from the groups about your current and past work, as well as what we need to do in the future to really meet the needs of animal health and welfare in Canada. I'd like to once again thank our sponsors of the forum, without whom these events would not be possible. And we're very grateful to all of the people who have sponsored, who are up on the screen today. And key things for today, for my presentation, I'm going to give you an update on Animal Health Canada, both the history and the work done to date, and then moving into the future work for Animal Health Canada initiative, and then knitting it together with today's session and your role in the project. This might be an initiative that you're familiar with, and in that case, stay tuned for the most up-to-date information. And for those of you who haven't heard of Animal Health Canada before, I hope this gives some context and background for how we might interact in the next phases of Council. So as you know, here's a little bit of history. As you know, National Farmed Animal Health and Welfare Council wasn't built out of the ether. It was built on the successes of many other programs and work. When Council came into existence in 2010, the organization stood on the shoulders of other work that had served the Canadian ag sector very well. And since 2010, some of the initiatives that have taken place in the Canadian ag sector are outlined in this diagram here. And Animal Health Canada is on the right as the next iteration in collaboration and collaborative problem solving for Canadian agriculture and farmed animals, building off what was already learned from other initiatives, what went well, and what we would like to avoid in the future. So Animal Health Canada really seeks to evolve to meet the new needs of stakeholders, as all businesses and organizations do. Council has always sought to be an iterative agency who seek to continually improve and work to serve stakeholders and partners. So this theme is really continued with Animal Health Canada. So before we get into what Animal Health Canada will become and what is, I just wanted to share some of the background on the project as well. So in 2017, the Plant and Animal Health Strategy was endorsed. You're going to hear more about that from Stephen. But Animal Health Canada was a project that was brought forth external to council, but included many members of council, plus additional stakeholders along the value chain. And that happened in 2018. Throughout the leadership and funding of this group, as Animal Health Canada, the Animal Health Working Group was struck, and a government and industry lead have been part of the work since inception. So the group has completed multiple work, such as a governance study, a gap analysis, and other scope of work planning together, reporting back to both the members of the working group and then keeping council informed as well. You can see there that in 2020, there was ministerial endorsement of the Animal Health Canada progress, and then a statement of intent that was also issued. We have a statement of intent that really shares that groups are behind the idea of Animal Health Canada and the initiative, what it stands for as the next iteration of collaborative problem solving in Canadian farmed animal agriculture. A great deal of, you can see the names that are listed on there for people who have signed already on the statement of intent. This process is ongoing, where we're continually accepting signatories onto this statement of intent to get behind the idea of Animal Health Canada. And several other provinces, territories, and industry groups are also on their way to signing this as well in the next couple of months. But you can see the names there that are present. And then our current support activities within council are really around the African Swine Fever Executive Management Board. So looking at preparing in the event of African swine fever coming to Canada and prevention of that, as well as the Foot and Mouth Disease Vaccine Bank Working Group that's ongoing. So those are two activities that are already in council that embody the idea and spirit of Animal Health Canada. And we'll move into our next milestones. As the process progressed from 2018, it became clear that council was actually the right place for Animal Health Canada to reside and for council to indeed evolve into. As such, discussions for this transition for Animal Health Canada to be accepted as council were begun and moved to fruition in 2021, so in September of this year. Members of council voted to support the proposed vision, mission, and preliminary governance plans put forth by the Animal Health Canada Working Group. And members also voted to expand the membership of council and adopt the name of Animal Health Canada for the National Farmed Animal Health and Welfare Council. So to be very clear, we are working right now after this vote from members to move to change our name from the National Farmed Animal Health and Welfare Council to Animal Health Canada. So we are currently becoming Animal Health Canada and going through that transition to become this different organization. So the vision and the mission are outlined here on the slide. They're set forth by the Animal Health Canada Working Group and accepted by council members. The structure of how council makes decisions will change to include more senior leaders as well as continued operational oversight. What this means really simply is that the good work that's being done at council and by our divisions and projects will unequivocally continue under the council umbrella. Welfare and the health of animals as exclusive but at times intertwined work will continue. Expert committees such as our animal welfare and one welfare committees are going to continue as well. But what this does mean is that there is a different vision and a different vision and mission, as well as a different governance structure that will be adopted as we move forward. So our next key pieces are really to complete governance work. So to refine and improve upon the governance work that was already done to ensure that we have all of the opinions and information that we need to fully succeed. Strategic planning, where we're going to ensure that we have a work plan and a strategy to move forward with everything that our stakeholders need prioritized and laid out for us so that we really have a roadmap for success. Falling out of those two big pieces, the governance and the strategic planning, are really the budget and the operational requirements that we will need to support those wishes and the way that we will be making decisions. What I think is clear won't change is that we want to be collaborative, we want it to be iterative, And we want it to be stakeholder based so that we're really meeting the needs for animals in Canada, for farmed animals in Canada, to serve them from a health perspective, but also a welfare perspective. As stakeholders of Council and attendees of this event, please expect updates on this initiative and opportunities to provide feedback on Animal Health Canada. A part of today's activities, as you'll learn from Stephen as well, is that we're going to be focused on feed forward to identify not only what you've been doing in your own organizations and what you've seen in the industries that you work in, but also what work needs to be done. What are your top concerns from your part of your industry? The initiatives that needs to be completed in animal agriculture to build a thriving sector that cares for the animal health and welfare of the animals that we steward. And we're counting on your input today as one of the many input sources to help us shape the future of Animal Health Canada, as well as document where we're at with the plant and animal health strategy. So that is my overview for today. And then with that, I'll turn it back over to Stephen. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Melanie. I think it's really helpful to just get a sense of where Animal Health Canada has come from, where it is now, and where it's going. And it's been clear from some of the feedback we've received through the pre-forum survey and certainly discussions that there is a wide range of awareness and understanding of what Animal Health Canada is and where it's headed. So I think this is a really nice level set for everyone. And again, my job here as we move into the rest of our session today is to talk a little bit about where we've come from. So if you recall that sort of visual that Melanie shared with Animal Health Canada on the right-hand side, taking a little bit of a deeper dive into some of those pieces, some of those activities, and again, some of the outcomes along the way that have contributed to getting to this place. So what I'm going to do now is share with you a little bit of a background on my team's involvement with Council on this topic, and also a little bit more on the context of the plant and animal health strategy and some of those pieces that I mentioned are along the way. For those of you that don't know me, just a really quick sort of overview and background on myself. I am the director and principal consultant of a consulting firm based in Guelph, Ontario called ACER Consulting, which stands for Agricultural Communications and Epidemiological Research. I also wear a second hat as an adjunct faculty member in the Ontario Veterinary College at the University of Guelph. And simply put, our firm works with Council and with many of you stakeholders on this call to understand, inform, and influence animal health and welfare. And we're particularly interested in doing that through applied research or scientific communication. And so those sort of key things that we're interested in really lend themselves well to this type of conversation or discussion. So we're really excited to be involved with Council in this particular initiative. And I provide you with that just so you have a sense of why and how we might fit into this conversation as consultants. And again, to put this a little bit more in context for you, we are here to support Council. And the Council, many of you I know are aware, and some of you this may be news, that Council, when the Plant and Animal Health Strategy was developed and implemented in 2017, the National Farm to Animal Health and Welfare Council was earmarked as being responsible for coordinating the implementation of the animal side of the Plant and Animal Health Strategy, or the PAWS. So you'll hear me refer to PAWS a number of times. And so as we've moved from 2017 onward, Council is now starting to think about what are the major outcomes and activities that they can speak to in terms of the animal health progress that pertains to the PAWS. And so they've contracted my team to support them in developing this sort of animal health progress report at this point in time. Now, I appreciate that many of you may not know exactly what the Plant and Animal Health Strategy is, or specific elements of where it might have come from, or what's even involved. So at a high level, I'll just speak to some of the who, what, why, where, when, and how as it pertains to the PAWS. The first piece for you to know is that this is largely owned by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And again, it was developed, I'll speak to this development a little bit more in a moment, but was developed and implemented in 2017. So I guess the first thing to start off with is, well, why do we actually have a plant and animal health strategy? What was the need in the first place? And just looking at the names and the organizations that are represented on our call today, I think it will be clear and no surprise to anyone that we have a number of challenges that address, that we face when it comes to addressing animal health and welfare issues across Canada. We certainly see increases in global trade and movement of animals and animal products, resulting in a challenge associated with emerging diseases. And again, just changing patterns of movement and trade are going to impact us in terms of our preparedness and response activities. We appreciate that in addition to those things, we have changing climates, technologies, and supply chains that are influencing how, where, and who we need to engage when it comes to addressing these issues. And of course, we see evolving science, best practices, and production methods associated with livestock and poultry across the nation and at different sizes and scales. And so again, our understanding and our approaches need to continue to evolve with these pieces. And on top of all of this, we need to overlay the fact that public and consumer perceptions also have a significant influence over what we do and why. And so if we ball many of these challenges up, we can appreciate that we have a complex network of ever-changing challenges that influence our ability to effectively and efficiently address animal health and welfare challenges in any particular region of Canada, and of course at the national or federal level. Now, when we also think about why we need to develop the stakeholder group got together to talk about the pause in 2016, 2017, was that there seemed to be really a greater emphasis among most entities on response and recovery opposed to preparedness. So you see on the right-hand side of the screen, this notion of insufficient preparedness in some commodities when it came to foreign animal diseases, for example. We also see that there are siloed or limited data sharing and partnering. And you heard in forum session 1 a lot of discussion around the notion of public-private partnerships. What are the key principles that are important for us to embrace? What are keys to success, for example? These are things that we need to continue to embrace, and the pause really recognized that and called that out here. And more importantly, I mentioned this notion of siloing. The idea here was that there was a lack of coordination and integration of animal health and welfare activities, again, across different regions of Canada and at the national level. And we know, of course, that we can be more efficient and effective whether it be with resources or information, if we can have better integration. So the need to optimize and collaborate was called out, and really a genesis for the pause. So when I talk about this plant and animal health strategy, I've mentioned it's being implemented in 2017. This is really a strategy that's meant to provide a national vision to address and prevent evolving risks to plant and animal health in Canada. And the vision here was that Canada's plant and animal resources are going to be safeguarded, contributing to economic growth and the protection of human health and the environment. So you really hear this sort of One Health lens being taken with this type of vision or this type of strategy. Now, a number of extensive consultations were had in order to help inform what this strategy should look like. And the core objectives that Canada agreed to, or Canadian stakeholders agreed to as part of this vision, were threefold. The first was that they wanted Canada to ensure Canada has the necessary information and awareness that's needed to support forward-looking risk management and evidence-based decision-making, right? So we're using the data and information as it comes in. We have better integration and coordination, which is ensuring that we can make more effective, more coordinated decisions. Second, that Canada has a comprehensive, effective, and integrated system that prevents and proactively addresses plant and animal health risks. So pretty broad-based objective, right? But obviously we can appreciate the importance of, again, a key word here, integration, improving efficacy and efficiency. And last but not least, ensuring that Canada has a robust and responsive plant and animal health system that supports economic growth and market competitiveness for Canadian products. So what you hear are very broad-based objectives, right? These are high level, but they are meant to help sort of form the basis for a strategic vision for Canadian stakeholders, both government, industry, and everyone in between, when it comes to a vision and associated activities and outcomes related to animal health and welfare. So when we think about the pieces that need to go into the strategy, on the right-hand side, you see this vision that I spoke to. Now, if we work backwards to say, well, what are the key things that need to actually happen to ensure this vision comes to fruition? The key two pieces in the middle here is that we need to ensure that risks to Canada's plant and animal resource spaces are prevented, reduced, and managed. And as a result, we'll see Canada's ability to safeguard these resources is trusted and respected at a global stage or from a global perspective. In order to achieve these two pieces, we need to think further back, right? And so here is where we need to talk about animal health and welfare risks and ensuring that they're controlled at critical points along the supply chain or along throughout production. We need to think about access to accurate and timely information to inform action. And I think all of us can appreciate the challenges associated with that. One is actually generating that data and that information that can be used in a meaningful way. The second, of course, is actually ensuring that that information is shared with the right partners in a timely manner. If we look further down, we see preparedness to respond and recover from plant and animal related emergencies. So again, it's thinking through the different phases of an outbreak and thinking about what do we need to do in a peacetime and what do we need to do when we are actively trying to manage an outbreak, and then thinking longer term towards recovery. And then lastly, to make sure that our actions are carried out in a coordinated and timely manner. So again, very high level sort of activities or outcomes, but these are the pieces that were used back in 2016 and 17 to develop the vision for the plant and animal health strategy. So how was the pause meant to work? On the right-hand side, you can see that really the consultations that were held and the scope, let's call it, of the pause is meant to include everyone from federal, provincial, and territorial governments, even municipalities and local authorities. On the government side, of course, to looking to industry and producers, where we talk about individual producers and their representative organizations, all of the advisors and consultants that slot in to support producers on the farm or in particular organizations. We also think through the supply chain, where we have processors in the distribution industry and other key players such as retailers along the supply chain. And then also including academia and really other key partners and stakeholders, so NGOs, right? And even the general public, to the extent that we can engage them in information or in consultations about where we need to head in regard to animal health and welfare. The guiding principles that these stakeholders, when they were brought together, decided on were that the pause needs to shift from this response or reactive approach of animal health and welfare to much more of a prevention-focused approach, where we have a shared accountability model. It's not just the government that's responsible for planning and response when it comes to foreign animal disease response, for example, that there is a shared accountability structure here. And that, again, as we move forward in time, and I think we have some concrete examples of this moving forward, where industry is actively engaged and has accountabilities alongside the government and other partners. We also had a guiding principle here of efficiency and continuous improvement. So recognizing that as things evolve, we too must evolve and change our approach. And then thinking through, again, this idea that I've spoken to around collaboration, sharing, and transparency, a challenge, no doubt. And again, in session 1 of the forum this year, we heard about public-private partnership. We heard about other approaches to collaborate and share information more readily, break down silos, particularly between government and industry, towards a shared vision or a shared set of outcomes that we're all after. And then lastly, to make sure or to help inform that activities and ideally the strategies that individual organizations take are adaptive, evidence, and risk-based. So it's very much an approach that's building off of what information do we have, how do we work more together to ensure an integrated set of activities and outcomes. So the pause listed 4 key areas for action, and they were specifically, again, very high level, but specifically coordination through partnerships, having a system that's founded on prevention and defended through effective response and recovery, focusing on collection, analysis, and sharing of information, and enabling desired behaviors between other actors in the supply chain or other actors in the particular context of a given animal health or welfare issue. I won't belabor this slide because you've seen it already through Melanie, and she introduced the sort of where animal health has come from, which is on the far right here. But as we look backwards in time, we can see that in 2017, of course, the pause existed. Prior to 2017, we see the livestock market interruption strategy being initiated. In 2009, we actually saw the National Farmed Animal Health and Welfare Council strategy be first minted, and we in 2020 see an update to that that's informed and based off off of some of the other activities and outcomes that have occurred along this timeline. And of course, as we go from 2017 and move forward, we have a substantial amount of activity and some really positive outcomes that I think we can speak to that are sort of mutually beneficial when we think about where animal health and welfare sits today in terms of management, in terms of activities, and again, as well as outcomes. Now, part of our discussion beyond today, and I'll get to this a little bit more in a moment, is to talk about to what extent did the plant and animal health strategy help influence some of these outcomes, help guide some of these activities. We're going to focus a little bit more on broad-based activities and outcomes throughout today, but it's important that we ask that question. To what extent has the plant and animal health strategy influenced some of these things? It's nice for us to be able to talk about these key outcomes. It's nice for us to talk about integration, coordination, efficiency, and so on. But to what extent did this strategic vision influence and ultimately result in some of these activities? Attribution is what I'm getting at here. And so that's a key fundamental piece that I'm really interested in having discussions about as we move forward. Today, we're going to sort of cast a wider net, and we're rather going to focus on what have your organizations, what have stakeholders across Canada who have a vested interest in animal health and welfare actively implemented and achieved over the last several years, and where are we headed moving forward? So again, that sort of past, present, and future perspectives, which is really the theme of our session today. So that sort of gives you a bit of a sense, again, high level, I appreciate that, but a bit of a sense in terms of the plant and animal health strategy. I will have some links built into this presentation. We can share them in the chat as well. If you haven't looked at the CFIA's website, where you look a little bit more in detail at the plant and animal health strategy, I'd encourage you to do so. But again, appreciate that this is a little bit more of a retrospective, because we now have several other outcomes, most notably and most recently Animal Health Canada, that are going to build off of the strengths of what's been happening with our industry, with our government partners, and look to leverage those and coordinate those more efficiently and more effectively moving forward. So in the last half of my talk here, I'd like to just hit on what our firm is doing with council when it comes to preparing an animal health progress report. How do we deal with that attribution piece that I just talked about? And what progress can we speak to as it relates to animal health and welfare outside of the scope of the plant and animal health strategy? And then again, how much has the plant and animal health strategy influenced those actions? I want to bring you back to some notable outputs that were developed by Jeff Spooner and Melissa Mogi back in 2019 and 2020. You can actually find these on the National Farm to Animal Health and Welfare Council website under work areas, which is further subcategorized under 2020 Plant and Animal Health Strategy, or PAWS. And many of you had participated in, I believe, interviews with Jeff and Melissa to discuss at a high level what some of the major activities and outcomes of your organizations were. And here you will find graphically designed sort of infographics or fact sheets that call out some of the major activities and achievements that different organizations that participated in this sort of initial pilot project achieved. And so here you see some showcased from the CVMA, you see one from Dairy Farmers of Canada, and you see another in the middle here from the Ministry of Agriculture in Quebec. And so different partners participated in this initial pilot project, which was really to engage stakeholders in this discussion about what have you done over the last several years, what achievements have you been able to get in terms of animal health and welfare, and where are you headed? And then again, that important question: how does the plant and animal health strategy, or how did the PAWS influence these activities and shape some of these outcomes? Did it at all? Those are the questions that they've been asking. So when I was engaged with council to help build on some of that pilot work, we set a couple of key project goals. The first was to develop a national animal health progress report relating to the activities around the plant and animal health strategy. That's the core mandate and expectation CFIA has placed on the council when it comes to the animal side of the PAWS. Most notably, I was interested in capturing stakeholder perspectives on the value and the utility of the plant and animal health strategy in terms of its ability to guide organizational planning, policies, and activities as it relates to animal health and welfare. And of course, I'd add in there too, influence. To what extent has it been able to influence some of these things? And lastly, our job here is to really facilitate conversations with council members and stakeholders to support the development of Animal Health Canada. So I want to just sort of level set that this project is not just a retrospective perspective, not just looking at what's been happening over the last several years as it relates to animal health and welfare and talking about to what extent the pause influenced those things. That's sort of one of our key goals. But the second goal here is to take those lessons learned, identify some of those gaps and opportunities, and help to inform conversations and the development, the further development, I should say, of Animal Health Canada. Now, when we developed this project, we looked at a 5-phased approach, and I'm just going to briefly walk you through those phases now. We initially started with a kickoff meeting with council, and here not only did we clarify some of our goals, roles, and objectives, but we established a monthly reporting schedule, some of the nuts and bolts of our project, of course. The main thing here is that we have a pause working group with council. That's made up of council members and stakeholders that have been engaged in some of the previous work, even the consultations that led to the pause, and so they can help inform and guide decision making. And this project started back in July of this year, and will move forward beyond into July or so of next calendar year. Now, when we look at the background review phase, which is our second phase in this project, our job was to come in rather sort of fresh in terms of we hadn't been involved in the consultations and the pause initially. We have certainly been aware of it and had discussions about it, but outside sort of the formal development. And so as somewhat of an unbiased group, we came to this project and said, well, let's review all of the technical information. Let's look at the actual strategy, and let's try to understand some of the major foundational documents that have led to the strategy itself, and where we've, as an industry, as an organization, have gone beyond there. So we reviewed the plant animal health strategy itself, the Animal Health Canada gap analysis and development documents that Melanie talked about. We looked at the council strategies, both the 2009 and the more updated 2020 strategies. And then, of course, those infographics that I shared, which was that pilot project done by Jeff Spooner and Melissa Mogi. We also carried out a number of meetings or interviews with the pause working group and specific members to try and get an understanding of how they thought we should develop this evaluation plan or speak to this animal health progress report. So we talked with the CCVO, we talked with Canadian Cattlemen's, for example, we talked with CAHI and a number of other national organizations to try and get some perspective on how do we approach this? How do we make sure that we deliver a report that satisfies what CFIA and ultimately council expects in terms of an animal health progress report? And on the flip side, how do we make sure that we deliver something that has value and can help guide and inform the development of Animal Health Canada or other council initiatives for that matter? What do we do moving forward? I think that's the key piece here, not just a retrospective, not just an update on where we've come from. So this was some of the key pieces that we recently concluded in September of this year. One of the things that we really came away with hearing loud and clear, among other things, was that many of the stakeholders felt it was important that we adopt a broad definition of animal health. You've likely noticed that I continue to use animal health and welfare sort of in that same, that vein or conversation. But if you actually look at the pause, it speaks specifically to animal health. It doesn't have that welfare component. And yet, of course, we appreciate that while there are absolutely important nuances between the two, there are many people who will encompass welfare within their definition of health. There's, I think, very important and very good rationale for keeping these as separate conversations. But we can appreciate, I think, for the most part, that it's important when we talk about activities and outcomes that we call out some of the major initiatives and major activities that have been going on, specifically focused at livestock and poultry welfare, for example. So for our purposes, we are going to broaden our definition of animal health in the context of the pause and try and capture some of these welfare related outcomes and activities as well. Sort of a direct springboard from that is we really saw One Health and to a lesser extent, but it is there, the notion of One Welfare called out among many of our stakeholders in terms of saying we need to capture examples and speak to the importance and value of looking at things through a One Health lens. And for that matter, considering One Welfare and the importance of that. And this is I suppose, somewhat of an emerging concept, not something that will be too unfamiliar with any of you, but calling out the importance to have an explicit definition and set of activities that do look at the interconnectedness between the welfare of our environment, and then individuals as well as their animals. And last but not least, in doing some of these things, it allows us to capture some major activities that are happening within divisions of council and between or among many of our partners, which includes things like the codes of practice or more broad-based quality assurance programs that have a specific call out for animal welfare policies and expectations. We have antimicrobial stewardship, of course, that's a fundamental piece of the conversation when it comes to health and welfare. And also capturing the fact that, hey, we've had a pandemic over the last 2 years that provides, obviously a lot of disruption, but some opportunity to consider and perhaps capture some of the disruption and more importantly, the lessons learned. How are organizations moving forward and adapting and evolving due to COVID-19? And how can we use some of that understanding to inform where something like Animal Health Canada should go moving forward? Now, in phase 3 of our project, we're moving into developing a framework for actually reporting, evaluating and reporting on these outcomes, these activities. So here we need to focus on, well, what's a pragmatic approach to collecting all of this information? What key performance indicators do we want to look at, for example? What we've decided here is that we're going to employ a largely qualitative approach at this time. The reason for this is that so many different activities and outcomes have been achieved and been worked on, and those are really tailored and unique to many organizations. And so for this point in time, because we don't have a prior animal health progress report to work from, and the pause itself doesn't exactly make explicit reference to KPIs, what we want to do at this time is focus on telling the story of each of our organizations with regard to what activities and what progress have they made, what are they most proud of, and where are they moving forward. That's our focus, and we're going to support that with quantifiable metrics. So how do you know you've succeeded, for example? What evidence can you provide us? What case studies can we write to actually demonstrate how you're collaborating more effectively, how you're achieving better integration and more functional response planning, for example? So that's what we're going to try and focus on here by capturing these stories. Now, our key focus areas for these interviews or this qualitative approach is sort of going to be stepwise. So if we work from our bottom step on the left-hand side of the screen, our goal here is to investigate each organization's role in the plant and animal health strategy in itself. So where did it come from? How were they involved, or were they involved at all? To what extent are they aware of the strategy, and where do they or how do they see their role? Well, do they see themselves as having a role in the strategy in and of itself? From there, we're going to review your organizational priorities, activities, and outcomes. So I want to know for each of your organizations, what have you been up to over the last several years? What have you prioritized in terms of activities and actions? What kind of policies, programs, and practices have you been working on implementing, for example? From there, I want to build on that story by saying, well, what successes have you achieved? What are you most proud of? What's that success story, and how do you know you succeeded? Provide me with some of that information. And we expect to do this through our interview. We also expect to be reviewing background documentation, annual reports, and any other specific information that can be provided for us to look at. As I mentioned, we're going to attempt to capture some of the major COVID impacts and lessons learned for your organizations. We're going to ask specific questions about how One Health and One Welfare factor into decision-making, planning, or even whether or not it's on the radar of specific organizations. And then moving forward, looking into the future. Where do you anticipate your focus being moving forward with regard to priorities, activities, and outcomes? Now, here we go. My slides are sticking on me. So if we bring this together in terms of the conversation we're keen on having with many of you stakeholders in this room, we want to understand, what have you been focused on achieving? What are your successes? What are you most proud of? How has the pause shaped or influenced these actions and these outcomes? And then what are your goals and objectives in sort of the short to medium term? So sort of the 3 to 5 year outlook. Now, as we move forward into phase 4A, we are really focused on conducting a mixed methods evaluation with more of a heavy weighting on the qualitative side at this point in time. And today is really this phase 4A. It's about leveraging November's council forum to engage many of you in these conversations. Everyone brings a unique perspective to the table here. And what we're keen on doing is trying to get a better understanding of your perspective, what you've been focused on and where you've come from and where you're headed. So that's part of the reason for the structure and function of our forum today. Beyond this, we are moving into forum session sorry, just a couple other comments on 4 in session 2. Our job here is to stimulate discussion, right? And so again, you see this theme of past, present, and future perspectives, and that's what we're going to, through a number of facilitators, a huge team that we've got today to help facilitate conversations. That's what we're going to be focused on. And I'll call out too that at this point in time, I'm not looking for each of you to be the only person speaking from your organization. We're not looking for one formal organizational response. Many of you play very different and very important roles within your organizations. And what we were looking for you to do is to be able to speak from where you sit. Based on your role in the organization, what have you been focused on over the last several years? And if you feel comfortable being able to speak to largely where your organization as a whole has been focused with respect to animal health and welfare, I think that's a nice piece to speak with as well. But just as a sort of a level set in terms of what our perspective and what our scope of the discussion will be today. Now, beyond our session today, where we're going to be headed is implementing this evaluation framework with primary council partners, and I'll define that for you in just a moment. Our goal here is up until, or from November to about March of next year, we're going to be engaging many of you or representatives from many of your organizations to discuss and obtain some of this information around where you've come from, where you're headed. Our primary focus, which has been really mandated by council at this stage, and it's largely due to the scope of project, the resources we have, the timelines that we have, we're going to focus on national organizations. Now, I appreciate that so much work is happening regionally and provincially in particular, that it's a challenge and it's a limitation that we can't go into that level of depth. What we're going to try to do is to ensure that our stakeholders that we do speak to, so for example, national commodity group associations, that they're able to speak to, if at all, some of the major activities, outcomes, and achievements that individual provinces have been able to obtain over the last several years, and perhaps where they're headed moving forward. I again appreciate that this is sort of an important decision, but at this time we have so many national partners that we've opted to focus our effort there to try and capture a national picture. And then sort of a phase 2 of this project beyond June of next year is to perhaps look at things in a little bit more granular level, look at things sort of regionally and provincially. Now, moving forward, who are we going to be looking to talk to? This is not an exhaustive list, but does give you a sense of some of the major types of organizations or specific organizations that we've earmarked to discuss. We'll be meeting with, of course, all of the national, federal levels of government. We'll be talking with many of the council divisions and staff that have been called out or showcased through previous forum sessions. Of course, reaching out to all of our major national livestock and poultry commodity groups. We'll also be speaking with processor groups. We'll be looking to speak with the veterinary community, of course, and then speaking with chief veterinarians and to the extent that they can, getting or pulling some information from chief veterinarians when it comes to their affiliated ag departments. There is an opportunity, of course, to capture some of the provincial or regional differences, but again, given the scope and given our timelines, we have to sort of temper our expectations based on our capacity to go into the sort of the deeper dive on the regional side of things. As we round out our project, we're here talking about phase 5, where we're really reporting back to you. We're doing our best to synthesize the results of the fall forum today. We're going to use a number of different approaches to do that. We will also synthesize and summarize the results of our many interviews. We'll be conducting well over 30, I imagine, when we're all said and done. And we are going to present the findings in a final report that will be submitted through council, as well as a webinar that will be you'll be invited to participate in. Our target completion is roughly 1 year from when we started, which will be July of next year in 2022. My last couple of comments here is around our important keys to success. So how do we ensure that we're actually going to be able to comment on some of these things? There's so much going on in Canada. There's so much depth when it comes to the conversations that we could have around some of these key activities and outcomes, even within certain organizations. So how do we actually ball all of this up? Our job here is to consistently communicate with our working group and many of our partners to understand what our goals and objectives are, and again, to try and clarify where they've been and where they're going. A commitment to this project scope, which I've earmarked a little bit for you already, this idea that we need to keep focused on working with national organizations at this time, so we can make sure that we get something completed that's rather fulsome, rather than just one or two deeper dives into specific provinces. We also comment on the need for relying on our PAWS working group. This is again made up of partners, council staff, and stakeholders that have a vested interest in understanding where the PAWS sits in this continuum of animal health and welfare progress in Canada, and how this can be useful to inform Animal Health Canada's development moving forward. So again, really using them as our sounding board for advice, for decision-making and guidance moving forward. From many of your organizations that we will look to engage, it will be about timely and pragmatic data requests. I appreciate that everyone's busy and that we have lots on the go. That's, I think, an important point to make when it comes to ensuring that we have success around implementation of robust activities and achieving, very strong outcomes in animal health and welfare. But we're going to do our best to ensure that we can get information in a timely manner that we can use for this project, even though we have a tighter timeline. And then again, understanding that we're in phase 1. This is a process that will be ongoing, and I think moving forward, Council will look to try and capture more consistently what's happening in Animal Health Canada, health and welfare among different organizations across Canada. These slides will be shared with you, and so I appreciate you're not going to jot down a big, huge link like this. But for more information, there are a number of places that you could go to today to find more information on the plant and health the plant and animal health strategy for Canada at the CFIA's website. You can look at Council's commitments to the PAWS and the activities that are ongoing, specifically on the Council website. You can also go to a separate section of the Council's website to see more updates on where Animal Health Canada is at and how it's progressing. And whether or not you have any specific Council-related questions, you can certainly reach out to Melanie or any staff for that matter to just follow up on some of the questions and comments that you may have there. And then, of course, I would be very happy to also speak to any of the questions or comments related to our project. I appreciate that there's been some comments and some discussion going on in the chat. Just for time today, we won't have time to go through all of those questions, but I appreciate many of our team members are monitoring those and responding to them as they come. We will also make sure we capture those and I can speak to those. If not, at the end of the session, we'll follow up and provide a bit more of a summary response to everyone who's participating by email following this session. So rest assured, we'll make sure we capture those, and we do appreciate your feedback. And just in the interest of time, we'll move forward. So one of the things that I want to set up for us now, as we sort of just round out our first hour here in our forum, we've got 2 hours left in our agenda, and we've really earmarked 2 sections for breakout discussions, as I've mentioned before. So if you're not familiar, I think many of you will likely have lived on Zoom, as I have for the last couple of years with COVID. But in a moment, we're going to open up breakout rooms. You're going to see a pop-up that will appear shortly on your screen asking you to join a breakout room that you've been pre-assigned with. Roughly 9 or 8 to 10 people in each breakout room. Within those breakout rooms, you will also have a facilitator, a partner who is graciously willing to help facilitate some conversation with you and your team, you and your peers rather, around a couple of key questions, which I'll introduce in a moment. When you enter your room, I would encourage you, if your internet will allow, to please have your camera on and ideally be familiar with how you mute and unmute yourself for audio. And we are going to do our best to make sure that this is an effective and efficient set of discussions as we move forward. Our first breakout discussion, each breakout discussion is going to last for 25 minutes. We'll be monitoring that time window, and we'll provide feedback on how things are going as we move forward. And we will also have a bio break when we come back. So we're going to enter into our first breakout session in just a moment, and then we're going to come back and we'll have a 10-minute bio break, and then we'll do some debriefing and some discussion on what different groups have achieved in terms of some of their discussions. Our first breakout group we're going to have here is on the past and present perspectives. And so what I've asked your facilitators, and I'm going to ask each of you as members of our forum today to discuss and to think about, is first, what would you say have been your top 3 priority areas when it comes to animal health and welfare over the past several years? We've earmarked 4 years because we're thinking about the implementation timeline of the pause. Now, I also want you to think about and reflect on, over those past 4 years, what would you say you are most proud of in terms of achievements or successes as it relates to these priorities? In other words, where have you come from? What have you been focused on? And what have you achieved? What are your major impact statements? That's what I want to try and capture here. And our facilitators are going to help drive this home. So again, in just a moment, we'll have that breakout room open, and then you'll have the option to discuss that, to briefly introduce yourself with your group, and then your facilitator will help walk through some of these discussions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment. And I just want to briefly touch on a couple of key themes that came out. As you recall, we had emailed a pre-survey when you had registered for this forum that asked a couple of these questions. And it was really for us just to try and get the juices flowing a little bit on what you're thinking and what you have been up to. So really, sort of at a high level, we received over 60 responses in our survey from a wide variety of organizations, from government to private industry to academia, and very much appreciate all of those that took some time to fill this out for us. A wide array of species represented there, many organizations, of course, looking or having mandates to address multi-species, but we have a high density of folks looking at livestock, almost 20 people with an equine focus, 25 people with a poultry focus, and then minor species really well covered as well. Everything from fish and bees to some others such as cervids, wildlife, mink, and goat. When we look at some of the major themes of the responses that come out here at this stage anyway, on the priority animal health and welfare topics that these organizations have been focused on over the past 4 years, we see some interesting ones. Not surprisingly, we see and hear that many of your organizations are focused on foreign animal disease or emerging disease preparedness and response. So we see avian influenza, African swine fever, really rising to the top as some key ones that people are looking at. We see a lot of discussion around biosecurity and health monitoring. How do we improve on this? How do we see adoption of biosecurity practices on farm? We see disease surveillance, not surprisingly, rounding out some of the major themes, antimicrobial use and resistance as stewardship as well as being a very common theme. And really pleased to see here that many comments around the implementation or even the identification of key animal welfare standards, trying to further improvement and adoption of animal welfare best practices and advance on specific activities such as euthanasia, humane transportation, pain mitigation, for example. We also see many of you calling out the importance of looking at things and planning through a one health and one welfare lens. We see a fair amount of discussion around veterinary workforce issues, so ensuring that we have appropriate veterinary complement of veterinarians and veterinary staff, of course, registered veterinary technicians being a key part of that. And then we also see some comments around prioritizing KTT for producers, trying to improve, strategic communication and obviously the outcomes that are associated with better communication to producers around what's coming, what's expected, and how they can prepare for emerging diseases, how they can improve and comply with emerging programs and policies around health and welfare. So those are some of the major priority health and welfare topics that we hear from many of you in this room. So just bear with me for one moment. We are going to open our breakout rooms now, and this should prompt you in just a moment, and then we should be good to go. So in the interest of time, we will jump into sort of a bit of a debrief session here on this first set of breakout discussions. As I mentioned, the goal here was for us to focus on where have your organizations been focused over the last 4 or 5 years? And in relation to some of those key priorities, what have you achieved? What success stories can you share? And how do you know that you've succeeded? So as I've reviewed some of the notes with my team, we've seen some really nice themes emerge from the conversations that your group are having. We've seen many of you are talking about the development or further refinement of quality assurance programs that are, I'd say, I'd probably argue from experience, multifaceted. They're not just focused on food safety anymore. They're much more focused on addressing issues that come to the fore in terms of public trust and public perception, or consumer trust and perception specifically. And so naturally, you see I think a large number of folks talking about refinement of quality assurance programs specifically focused on animal care outcomes, best practices, minimum required elements, and different strategies for implementation of those quality assurance programs. We see this, of course, coming from many of our livestock and poultry commodity representatives. We see also some common themes around surveillance, either surveillance for emerging pathogens or pathogens of concern. We also see a number of people talking about preparedness and response planning, most notably African swine fever. We have a number of folks that are intimately involved for either government or industry organizations to address and work on preparing for and developing an integrated response plan for ASF if and when it hits in Canada. We also see a large number of people talking about trying to further the biosecurity agenda. And that comes as sort of part and parcel with some of the response and preparedness planning that I've just spoken to, but a number of people speaking to integration of biosecurity principles and best practices, often from the biosecurity and the national standards, into their quality assurance programs. We see a lot of discussion around antimicrobial use and resistance, and of course, the natural extension of discussions around stewardship and how we integrate that into on farm, but I guess, again, throughout production, of course, with major and minor species. We also see a lot of people talking about social license and how they prepare to address that at the primary production level, and how they can ensure that they still have social license when it comes to production. And again, sort of tying in some of those practices, some of those programs and policies to protect and maintain social license while addressing an evolving set of perceptions and expectations from the supply chain. And we also see some comments around mental health and welfare coming from a human perspective. And I think that's a really nice and interesting perspective to be bringing up as well. Just from a quick glance and a quick debrief internally, these are some of the major themes that we were able to kind of identify as we looked through some of the notes and debriefed on our side of things. I want to call on a couple of our facilitators to perhaps give a bit more of a detailed summary of some of the themes or some of the discussion that they had. So Carolyn Ramsey, I wonder if you might be open to coming off mute and just briefly summarizing or adding to anything that I might have commented on as it relates to your group's discussion.
Sure, yes, happy to, Steve. I think I've unmuted myself. Yes, I must have. Yes, my group had a great discussion. It was about 4 people. I hope this little synopsis does it justice. I've been just trying to fix my notes and all the typos, but yeah, farmer mental health came up. That was top of mind, certainly in our group. You know, people had experience working with farmers after a disease outbreak and just seeing the tremendous mental health strain on producers after that. We touched a bit contemporarily on, of course, the flooding in BC and the impact we know that will have on producer mental health. And also just that important interaction between producer mental health and animal welfare. That really important linkage there to recognize. Another big theme that came up was probably data sharing. I don't think you touched on this, Steve, but just how challenging that can be to get that going, but how valuable it is and how it can really be beneficial to industry once it's all in place, but recognizing it is hard to get that going. I think those are, I know you probably want to move on to other groups, so that's what I'll highlight.
That's great. Thanks, Caroline. And some interesting ones and some timely ones given what's happening in BC and how that relates to health and mental health rather. So I appreciate those comments and some very timely examples of how we need to continue to focus in on some of those things, especially in an emergency situation, and not a disease situation, but an emergency that's obviously having a profound impact on our primary producers and the sector as a whole. Melanie, I wonder if you'd be open to giving us a quick summary from your group's discussion.
Sure, I sure can. 1 second. Let me, sure, I should have pulled up my notes here. Okay, so let me see here. So we had actually great discussion. Major themes were really around, so some of the things you've mentioned: veterinary workforce, pharmaceutical access, AMU, AMR, One Health and climate change issues and emerging diseases. Interesting, one new one was technology, the use of technology to enhance serving the needs of animals, health and welfare in particular, as well as the people that are involved and access to care, that type of thing. And some real pride in the pieces about code review and leveraging the collaborative work that's being done in various parts of council, in various parts of council, I suppose, and outside as well as working. Another one was government recognition for animal welfare programs within industry. And then things of pride were really around things like seeing the value in collaboration, seeing the results of preparedness and partnerships in development of trust to tackle big problems. So those are really key building blocks from our group in order to be able to work on big problems together. The value of preparedness. There was a great example from the avian influenza outbreak in 2004, learning from that lesson. That outbreak happened in British Columbia and was quite extensive. And then the subsequent work that's been done collaboratively to keep it contained with subsequent outbreaks have been much less impact. And then learning the value of preparation. And this group even felt that they've seen the fruits of that labor in the Abbotsford flooding, where they've been able to see that trust has been there and some of the collaboration and pieces have really paid off and being able to respond faster and more effectively. So I thought that was a really nice success story. And then there's lots of other wonderful positive success stories as well, but really focusing on that idea of collaboration and partnerships to develop trust to be able to work together on hard things.
That's great. Thanks, Melanie. Appreciate that. And some nice takeaways there in terms of, some concrete examples of the impact of things like collaboration and in the context of emergency response in particular. It's nice to be able to, it's one of those things when we think about evaluation, how do we evaluate collaboration and the efficacy of partnerships and things like that? And so being able to tie that to concrete examples of how that's actually impacted response times or the extent to which the outcome was satisfactory achieved in a timely manner, I think is a nice way to tie into how have we ensured we're collaborating more effectively and more efficiently. Jackie, would you be up for giving us a quick summary?
Sure. All right. So we had some really great conversation in our group in terms of the priority areas for health and welfare. A new animal care program, based on an updated code, a theme of communication. So, communications with producers, communications with downstream stakeholders like processors, retail, restaurant, and really proud of the efforts to do that communication. On the animal health side, dealing with the health of animals and so research on vaccine development and genetic resilience to parasites in particular, participating in the surveillance network, and the fact that, one of the silver linings of COVID has been our enhanced ability we really wrapped up our game around the webinars and being able to use online platforms to do a lot more technology and information transfer. And then more on the program side is the investments that have been made to assist farmers in investing in equipment, for example, for animals to gain some efficiencies in production, contribute to animal well-being and biosecurity, and also address climate change. In terms of reflecting on what everyone's proud of, kind of our conversation mostly focused on how everyone's, if I can really sum it up, is how everyone's managed to take the lemons like COVID, like our more recent BC flood situation, and turn that into lemonade. people really, ramping up their efforts around communications again, producer outreach, having been able to improve or enhance the awareness of farmers and seeing that One Health link. It's not so much that we're proud of COVID, but we're proud of how everyone has been able to respond to it and use it to enhance our efforts around animal health, animal welfare, and then just getting things done, like having a new animal care program, having a new food safety program in this environment, being able to still advance that work and roll those kinds of important initiatives out. Hopefully that did the group proud.
That's great, Jackie. Appreciate that. And I think the word that comes to mind as I listen to you in particular talking about some of those success factors is resilience, is just the ability for different organizations to have and maintain, and in some cases thrive during some pretty significant disruptive periods.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's great. Teresa, would you be open to giving us a quick summary?
Sure. So I think similar to the other groups, we had response and resilience to threats such as FADs and environmental or climate threats. We had One Welfare, so integration of animal welfare and human welfare in terms of priority areas. And one that we haven't heard before is, I'm just going to scroll down and grab it here, but it's sort of creating policy from evidence. And there was a little bit of talk about that in and other people mentioning comms, but basically that idea of we're taking evidence that's coming, I think, primarily out of our academic institutions, and we're creating policy for that, and also sort of actionable items for people on the front lines, so both up and down. And then in terms of things that we're proud of, so certainly the codes of care came up, some activities in One Welfare, a nice concrete example out of Saskatchewan, where they have both provincial and regional level One Welfare groups that work together on both animal welfare and human welfare, dealing sort of on a problem-based basis, as well as sort of bigger picture thinking about that. And progress, of course, on CAS and the Western Canadian Animal Health Network, so that linking of surveillance information sharing across Canada strengthening. And then finally, the work that's been done on ASF and emergency preparedness. Those were things that people were proud of.
That's awesome. Thanks, Teresa. I really like the comments around evidence-based policy and evidence-based decision-making, which I agree. And I do, I did see Jeff in particular, as you were going through, as I was speaking and going through the chat, the importance of academic involvement in integrating that, not just in terms of the evidence that universities are producing, but also the vision, the strategic sort of structure and mission and vision of whether it be the plant and animal health strategy or more recently the Animal Health Canada. How do we ensure that the evidence can be produced in a manner that's focused enough and timely enough to inform policy, which obviously and decisions that need to be made much quicker, but of course too, putting it sort of flipping it around and thinking, well, what do we anticipate, needing more evidence on, and how can we be more nimble to produce some of that evidence in a timely manner to inform one another? So we need feedback loops, right? We can't be one-way flows of communication. We need to have proper comms channels. We need to have proper collaboration with academic institutions and partners as part of that discussion. So appreciate those call outs, and we'll, as part of in the context of my project, we'll make sure that academia is included to an extent as well. And then last but not least, let's jump over to Shauna. Shauna, would you be up for giving us just a brief summary of what you discussed?
Yes, for sure. Thank you. Yeah, we had some great discussion too, and some interesting perspectives. We definitely had some discussions similar to some of the others about collaboration being important, and data sharing and technology and things like that. But the things that seemed to really highlight in our group was the first discussion was around mental health, but not so much around the producer aspect, although we did discuss that. It was around the animal perspective. So animal mental health, and then also relating that to animal welfare. There's been some interesting work being done on, the effects of restricting conditions and how they contrast to the natural environment and the impact that's having on the mental health, looking at, some of the ethical concerns that this might raise, some of the abnormal patterns and what they might mean. So some interesting discussions around the animal health side, or the mental health side of animals. Also, another priority was animal surveillance and, the development of CAS and the direction that it's going, and seeing that as a continued priority. And then the involvement of organizations in Animal Health Canada right from the beginning to transitioning to this, official Animal Health Canada. And as well, another priority, just the traceability system that's been developed with the sheep organization. It's using kind of this modern architecture that shares information across the value chain. So, there's a lot of opportunities being created there, not just so much for traceability, but the potential for surveillance and animal welfare and other things down the road. So in terms of what was really prideful, I guess, among these priorities was the fact that there's been development and involvement in the NFAHW welfare codes. That we're seeing diagnostic systems moving into genomic testing, and that funding is starting to support those things from multiple levels. That the sheep trace system that they're using, it encompasses both animal health, animal welfare, and it's being done differently and effectively, that it's not a siloed approach and looks at things very broadly. And really getting people and organizations to really buy into this collaborative approach and seeing more of that.
That's great. Thanks, Sean. I appreciate that. And does really summarize some of the key results I think many groups have come away with in terms of looking at some of those notes. And again, many of the facilitators just sharing some of their thoughts. And I'll just sort of hit on some of the survey responses we received around major animal health and welfare successes that different organizations felt they've managed to achieve, some of which, or many of which, have already been hit on. But just to sort of bring it home as a quick summary, we see a lot of people commenting on generally feeling quite positive about having a more coordinated approach to emergency response preparedness and planning. And so whether that's protocol development, setting up surveillance and test and diagnostic systems, and management plans, there seem to be a number of people talking about feeling like there's more of a coordinated approach to doing these things and getting ready for foreign animal diseases. We see a lot of people commenting on the progression of the codes of practice or standards and frameworks that are meant to guide and support animal welfare programs specifically. And again, we have many different representatives of some of those great initiatives across Canada and different commodity groups, both major and minor species. We see a lot of people also commenting about looking at and adopting new technologies to facilitate more efficient traceability and animal health monitoring, and a lot of, again, discussion on promotion of best biosecurity practices. And that's often tied to more outreach and more extension to primary producers around biosecurity practices and expectations. And then the last two pieces I would comment on is we see a lot of people talking about positive elements around communication and implementation of antimicrobial use reduction strategies. So having policies and frameworks around what that might look like. And then it seems to be commented quite frequently more communication around and more guidelines around how to actually monitor and reduce use without compromising animal health and welfare in regards to antimicrobial use. So this summarizes some of the major priorities and some of the key success factors that our group here have managed to achieve. One of our goals beyond the life of today's session is to summarize all of these notes and to bring this together and use this as a bit of a foundation for our discussions that we'll have on a much more specific and granular level with many of your organizations or organizational representatives. Again, trying to capture where have you come from, where are you now, and what have you achieved. What I'd like to now go into is sort of a forward look of where are we headed. In the pre-survey, we asked participants to also talk about what you anticipate being the top animal health and welfare priorities your organization will be focused on over the next 5 years. Some of the major themes are very similar to some of the themes that have been the previous 3 to 5 year priorities. So some of the major ones we hear about are compliance with codes of practice. So we have implementation and development of expectations, not just for codes of practice, but for standards more broadly around everything from biosecurity to traceability. But a big theme for sure is animal welfare and animal care standards. And so we see a lot of organizations commenting on adoption, compliance, adherence to expectations that have been designed. We see many people talking about more embracing the One Health and One Welfare concepts more specifically and more explicitly. And I think you hear from a number of facilitators in their comments summarizing their group's discussion, the key elements of One Health and One Welfare. We heard a lot of people talking about mental health of different groups as it pertains to dealing with emergencies or disease events. And so again, calling out the value, the need, the importance of looking at some of these things through a One Welfare lens. And Georgia, I do note your comment as well. That may have just been me misspeaking. Certainly the interconnectedness between the welfare of our animals and the humans that have the relationship between human and animal welfare, and then obviously the environment that we all share and have to operate within. We also see a number of people, and I think this is an interesting theme and probably a timely one, is talking about the importance of evaluating and focusing on sustainability. And when we look at definitions around sustainability, we start to see comments around public trust and stakeholder engagement, certainly downstream. Many of you talked about that in your previous groups, but it's called out much more explicitly here. We also see some comments around climate change and how that impacts sustainability of various industries. And moving forward, we see a continued emphasis on disease prevention, preparedness, and response, and integrating biosecurity practices and health monitoring more quickly. And I know many of you in this room are working on dealing with big data solutions for health monitoring and understanding integration of different data systems, which also taps into how quickly can we respond, how quickly can we and effectively can we communicate about what we know, what we don't know, and then find ways to turn to disparate sources of information into epidemic intelligence or data that we can use more broadly. So those are some broad themes that we hear from the group when we start talking about the future perspectives. So what I'm interested in your breakout groups discussing now, as we move forward into your next groups, is 2 key questions. What do you anticipate being the top animal health and welfare priorities your organization will be focused on over the next 3 to 5 years? And you've heard today about Animal Health Canada, what has gone into its development, where it's at today, and the potential future impact or structure of Animal Health Canada. So it is being developed and it's moving forward. Given what you've heard today, do you see a role or ways that Animal Health Canada can support your organizational priorities or initiatives moving forward? How do we achieve some of these collaborative partnerships that we're talking about to get all of these outcomes that we like to talk about in terms of more efficiency and more efficacy in terms of programs and policies, better evidence-based decision-making? How do we achieve some of these things? So in a moment, your breakout groups will once again be opened up. We have done some rejigging to address where we have small groups. So you may be joining a slightly larger group this time with a few more people. So I'll ask again for you to briefly introduce yourself if you have new members, and then we're going to give you 25 minutes to discuss sort of a future perspective. Where is your organization headed, and how can the Council and Animal Health Canada help? So I'm going to stop there, and the breakout groups will be opened in just a moment, and you can join, and we'll bring you back again in about 25 minutes. Okay, I have 1:35 Eastern time on my clock, so we will jump in for the last minor section of our agenda today. And that was really to just summarize and debrief on some of the main comments from some of your discussions in the groups. Barbara, I do see your comment in the chat, so I had planned on addressing that, but I'll just address it now. All of our facilitators are taking notes in one way or another, and so what we'll be doing with those is after this event, we'll summarize and pull together some of the major themes and all of the specific elements from each group. We will share a summary of those notes with the group, as well as the recording of the larger group discussion that we're having here. And then we will use all of that information as one part of our larger project, looking at reporting on sort of major animal health and welfare activities and outcomes. So this information won't be lost. We'll absolutely use it. And yes, we will be sharing it in a summarized form for everyone as well. So we'll make sure that everyone who maybe didn't see their specific comments reflected in perhaps my summaries or some of the brief summaries from facilitators, that won't be lost. It will be used, and we'll very much make sure that we bottle that up. And there will be opportunity for feedback down the road as well. So I want to reiterate that we would like to be communicative about this, and I'm very keen on hearing your ideas beyond just today. So consider today a starting point on this conversation about where we're headed and what's been achieved. So when I, just as a sort of a high level summary, when I review some of the comments our facilitators are jotting down from your discussions, I see a lot of interesting things about where everyone's headed. I certainly see comments that leverage this previous sort of focus, the last 3 to 5 years, on the development of animal care best practices, expectations, and of course, codes of practice. I see more comments around shifting towards refining and evolving, and in some cases, building out animal care assessments to understand what's happening on the farm, compliance, and so on. I see some comments around focus on smallholder strategies for disease preparedness, certainly from a pig production perspective and from a small flock perspective, continuing to maintain a focus to address AI and ASF risks respectively. I also see a lot of comments around improved or increased stakeholder engagement, specifically looking at engaging more retailers, more of the public perspective on things as well. We see a lot of comments on climate change from many different groups talking about resilience around and sustainability in the context of climate change. More conversation and more discussion around mental health and the linkage between mental health and animal health or animal welfare. And last, I think some really interesting conversation from my personal perspective on improving veterinary care and access to veterinary care, particularly in underserved regions. A project we're involved with just in Ontario on this alone, but I know there's quite a bit of work across the country being done on this. So do we look at micro-credentials for registered veterinary technicians or other professionals? Can we find refinements or opportunities to modernize education and training, for example, or other supports to support and ensure veterinary care is provided where needed and when needed? So some broad-based summaries for me on where I see some of our discussions going around where you're headed. And then in regards to Animal Health Canada, some comments around more and continued consistent messaging on what's happening at the federal level or the national level around animal health and welfare. A lot more communication on what is Animal Health Canada, how has it been developed, who is involved, and where is it headed. A lot more discussion around coordination as well, and some specific examples of African swine fever and looking at, for example, the executive management board and that level of coordination and communication. And also some discussion around more structures for accountability and shared responsibility around animal health and welfare outcomes, which I think is an interesting piece that does start to bleed over into regulatory expectations, policies, and again, how does this entity structure itself to facilitate shared accountability models around animal health and welfare. So some broad-based themes from what I see as I look through. What I'd like to do again is call on some of our facilitators to kind of give us a bit more of a detailed perspective based on their conversations. And Colleen, I wonder if maybe we'll start with you, if you wouldn't mind taking yourself off mute and briefly sharing for us.
No problem. My apologies. My mouse wasn't cooperating. So some of the things that we talked about for the priorities over the coming years included things like veterinary capacity and the shortage of vets and how we can work together to help overcome that. There was some discussion too about understanding that there is a veterinary shortage. Are there also ways that we can change how we practice veterinary medicine? We, of course, not including myself since I'm not a veterinarian, but that was part of the conversations. Where there are other things like telemedicine, I think, and some other models out there that can be discussed, and how that would apply to things like animal health and welfare, I think is the key goal there, because if you don't have enough veterinarians to diagnose and identify an emerging disease threat, then some of our emergency preparedness goals are not going to be met. Certainly climate change came out quite a lot in our conversation, and looking about how do we then become sustainable and make sure that we have a broader approach to emergency management. We certainly talk a lot about animal health in the terms of disease through council currently, but when we look at Animal Health Canada and the direction that it's going, how do we expand that perhaps to think about some of the emergency management infrastructure that already exists that would complement that kind of a response framework? And then certainly sustainability funding for various activities, I think, across the board, as well as looking at how do we then leverage the data that we're collecting and potentially look at more efficiencies in how we use it.
That's great, Colleen. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. And certainly, yeah, some themes that carry over from some of the other groups I see as they're making notes as well. That's wonderful. Lucy, do you want to chime in with some thoughts from your group?
Yes, thank you, Stephen. So on the welfare side, like the acceptance of animals in production and the public trust into farming practices, and the fact that this will also affect the sustainability of the production was a topic that we discussed. That was discussed. The fact that the increasing of activities of the animal activists is on the farm is something also being discussed, and also the increasing of the need for increasing the veterinary capacity on the farm production. The fact that the research will also be focusing on alternative to AMU and AMR, and also the need to improve the knowledge and collaboration of those groups on that, on many groups on that, and not to put it on only on the vets, but also at the farm level. It was interesting to talk about the data sharing, and having like the fact that talk about data governance, and the fact that accessibility is one point, but compatibility to be able to gather them. And that was related to the discussion, the presentation that we had the first part of the forum. Also on the One Health, the access of the first of the thing was the fact that during this pandemic, it was interesting to see that the lab from the animal lab were not like used for the COVID, and then it would be interesting to see if that could be prolonged and to have a national plan for developing that, and the collaboration between the two. But it could be also to be used on both sides. Like if there's a need from the animal side, can we go knock and on the genomic testing being done, that could be done also on the human side. So that would be interesting. So have a discussion and working on that to have a national plan on that. And also on the One Health is the vaccine availability, as it could be limited as on the COVID now we're seeing on the mink side, like they're talking about vaccination, and also for the zoo animals, but also the fact that like for now there's only one companies, and it could be risky to depend on one company if there's a breakage in one plant. So that's a thing that maybe Animal Health Canada could look into at. It was interesting to see that there's the fact that we are moving on the welfare issue, that there's a need as welfare is improving, there's a need for more educated workers and to know about the new technology, how to apply it and how to integrate it at the farm level. So there's a big need, and some participant on the farm said that even doubles the need for more trained people. So it's a big need as now we're looking at a shortage of workers. The importance of producer mental health when an animal emergency happens, and also on the wildlife side, as we had some people working with the CWD disease, and like the work that needs to be continued on the code of practice, as all of them are working on that. So that was pretty much the wrap up of, hopefully that I didn't miss too much stuff that they were talking to. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Lucy. Appreciate it. Lots to unpack there, and a lot of good conversation, and a lot of ground covered too. So appreciate that. Cheryl, why don't we go over to you?
Thanks, Steve. In our group, we're talking about the next 4 years. the concept of preventative decision-making instead of reactive, talking about what could happen, a lot of science, more science, risk-based decision-making, more collaboration, more people being involved in those decisions. We also talked about how regulating the RVT position, so registered vet techs, Shannon, I hope I got that right, would also help with the vet shortage, because there's roles that they could play, retention and education on the role. They have professional ethics, so they would be a good place to start that conversation. We also talked about incorporation of code of practice and biosecurity and regulations. So that helps some industries that aren't able to do that for themselves going forward. In regards to Animal Health Canada, the members in my breakout room thought that communication and feeding information through is a really good aspect of Animal Health Canada because of the number of people that are there. Collaboration and community, bringing everyone with that process, and it's a team approach. And the fact that both people are at the table, so there's accountability. Government can hold the industry accountable, and vice versa. The industry can hold government accountable. And for those in my group, I hope I did you well.
Thanks, Cheryl. Yeah, and certainly that last piece there is, I think, nice to kind of emphasize. You see the themes, the two themes that are coming out here is this notion of we want consistent and frequent communication, but we also around messaging, also around what is being done, what could be done in terms of Animal Health Canada as an entity. But then we also see this sort of shared accountability piece coming in. So how do we make sure that we're communicating and making decisions with both parties, both major parties, government and industry, and other partners, of course, at the table to inform this? We all like to talk about evidence-based decision-making. Well, if we don't have the folks there that are responsible for making that evidence or using it or regulating the actions, then we're going to be less effective, plain and simple. And so I think some nice pieces coming out of there and consistent pieces as well. Doris, did you want to briefly provide a summary for us?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So quite similar to what other groups have already talked about, we've had really good conversation. So really, we mentioned climate change being the priority in the future. It really does need to be in the foreground for anything we do related to animal health and welfare. We talked about data interoperability and access, so enhancing channels of communication between groups, whether they're private or public sector, as well as just different multidisciplinary groups, and how to get groups together to work together to just kind of, information share and just improve our communication with these groups. We've talked about even with communication with producers. A participant mentioned, the challenge in the province of BC to be able to communicate with producers and just trying to get a tag levy and check off in the province. And this communication is really important because we want to communicate information that's needed for disease outbreak prevention and animal welfare. We talked about the importance of animal welfare and social license. So really, we need to spend more time to look at this and where it'll go in the future. We kind of mentioned in that topic that the Canadian economy is changing from primarily a commodity-based group to really at the leading edge of innovation, and how to integrate animal welfare as well as animal health, how to really integrate this into animal production practices to keep us cost competitive. And we also talked about, I think it was already mentioned before, just kind of looking at small production practices and how to ensure animal welfare is looked after there, as well as just maintaining systems and values in business models across the board with small production and commercial production facilities without losing anything. In terms of Animal Health Canada, we kind of took a different perspective with this question and just looking at perhaps potential challenges that Animal Health Canada may face. So we talked about kind of like who's really at the table, like whether we should include academia. We talked about perhaps including service and companion animal groups, because we do know that currently we have mostly commercial commodity groups being represented. We talked about perhaps even including producers at the table as well, and the need for data sharing and to have these kind of real partnerships with our key partners. So yeah, really good conversation with our group. Thanks, Stephen.
That's great. Thanks, Doris. Appreciate the summary and a nice fresh take there in terms of who else can be included and what are the challenges associated with doing that, or just more broadly setting up some of these acting on some of these sort of visionary statements about best principles and collaboration and shared accountability. That's all great to say. How do we actually put that together so that we can do these things, right? And I think that's a big piece that we want to move forward on in my project in terms of discussions around the how. So what are we doing? How are we achieving some of these things? And if we're not, how do we think we can? So I think really today was meant to be a discussion about the themes that are coming out in terms of what's working, what's not working, what have we achieved, and where are we headed? And so I hope that through some of the conversations you've had with your breakout groups, certainly the summary that we'll provide from all of the breakout groups, but the first hour where Melanie and I shared some of the background thinking as well, that this has been useful in just sort of giving you a sense of where some of the council activities around this topic are going and where they're headed. You will certainly hear more from myself, from my colleagues, Julia Ciracini, Dave Renaud, and others, as we look to engage you and your organizations to better understand what's happening. Today, again, it's hard to get into the weeds on concrete examples all the time and exactly how you're going to, or how collectively we are going to achieve some of these visionary statements. And that's what I want to focus in on with you. So over the next several months, that's what we're going to jump into. And so just before I hand things off to Melanie, I'll just make a couple of final comments. We do really appreciate everyone accommodating and participating in a large virtual forum. And certainly, the success of these conversations can't be had if we don't have routine engagement. And while COVID has presented no shortage of challenges across the board, I really want to commend the council for continuing to find ways to engage not just everyone here, but their stakeholders in a huge array of partners, which seems to be an ever-growing list of partners. So again, thank you all for your participation, for your time, for your engagement. We'll look forward from my team to reaching out to you. And please, if you ever have questions, comments, would like to chat, be very happy to do that in the context of this project or any other topic for that matter. I also just want to thank my team members, Dave and Julia, the council staff, and many partners, all of our facilitators. Thank you so much for your time. This doesn't happen without you, so I very much appreciate it. And then Melanie, Kate, Samantha, Lucy, all of you for some of the background work, and everyone else, Amy, and so on, that I'm sure I'm forgetting people, but there's a big team that's gone into supporting council activities across the board and this forum. And Renee and Elena, a big thank you to both of you as well. Melanie, I'll hand it over to you for some final remarks. Thanks everyone for your time, and it was a pleasure to get to meet and know many of you.
Thank you so much. So I won't keep us too long, but I did want to also I wanted to share that, as somebody who just joined the council in July, for me, it's very powerful to hear over 100 voices here today and more responses in the pre-survey. We really do need to hear from you on this project. And as Steve mentioned, we will continue to engage you on both the plant and animal health strategy and Animal Health Canada. What you say and contribute matters to us and will contribute to our roadmap for success with Animal Health Canada. We won't be able to do it without your input, or if we did, it wouldn't be right. So I know I really appreciate hearing all the feedback in the groups as well as in the chat, and just your attendance today has been wonderful. Just know that there's also an open door to discuss and bring ideas forward. I think Steve has shared my my email address as well. You're welcome to call me anytime as well, or to email. And I know that the members of council also feel the same way. I do want to thank Acer and their team, and again, our team of facilitators who have been our note and timekeepers and have kept the conversation going in the breakout rooms. And they were ready at the drop of a hat when we had such a good turnout for registration. So I really do want to thank you. And thank you to the people behind the scenes who made this event a success. I don't know if you're willing to turn on your cameras, but I would like to personally thank Amy Wright, Dr. Kate Todd, Sam Benatar, Dr. Lucy Verdon, and the members of our Forum Planning Committee, Colleen McElwain, Kathy Furness, Dr. Kathy Furness, and Jackie Wetbrook and Kate Todd again, along with Hélène Trepanier and Renee Raw. So just to summarize a couple of the key points that I really heard today as far as themes, I really do think that we have a long list of challenges and opportunities to tackle in animal health and welfare, and there will never be a shortage of problems to deal with. But what I really heard clearly is that there are opportunities to involve a wide variety of stakeholders in collaborative work to tackle these big and hard problems, and finding shared value, even when we have differing opinions and when the challenges are really big, is very possible. And I heard many of those examples today as from your accomplishments where you have seen the power of collaboration. And, you know, as Canadians, we would rather collaborate to solve problems. And I think we can leverage our success and trust to build forward towards Animal Health Canada. So we look forward to engaging you further and hearing what you need in order to serve the animals we all work with in your respective areas in Canada. And as mentioned, Animal Health Canada is evolving, and we really need input from stakeholders, which is each of you, in order to get it right. So in addition to documenting the plant and animal health strategy and getting some of the initial needs for Animal Health Canada, I do hope this session opens the door for more conversation with our organization and yours and any other opinions that you might have. So with that, I will just turn it back over to Steve, and thanks very much for coming.
Wonderful. Thanks, Melanie. And thanks everyone again. This adjourns our session. So we'll give you a couple of minutes back to run to the washroom before your next Zoom meeting. Thanks, everyone. We hope to talk to you again. All the best.